Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Advocacy from Both Sides of the Desk. My name is Shelby Berger, and I'm the Manager of Policy and Advocacy here at the Cancer Support Community. So today you're going to hear from our guest speaker, Adam Taliaferro, who currently works in state advocacy and alliance development at Bristol-Myers Squibb, in addition to his work as the Deputy Majority Leader in the New Jersey General Assembly and with the Adam Taliaferro Foundation. So today, Adam will walk us through his personal story and journey into advocacy, and then outline some of the many ways that you too can be an advocate. During the presentation, if at any time you have a question for Adam, please type it into the discussion box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll address them at the end. So before we dive in, I wanted to give a little background about CSC for those who may not be familiar with the organization. So the Cancer Support Community is the largest nonprofit network of cancer support worldwide. CSC, along with our Gilda's Club affiliates, is dedicated to ensuring that all people impacted by cancer are empowered by knowledge, strengthened by action, and sustained by community. So CSC achieves this mission through three areas. The first is our direct service delivery. So through over 40 CSC and Gilda's Club locations, more than 120 satellite locations, and a dynamic online community, CSC provides more than $40 million in free personalized services to more than 1 million people impacted by cancer across the country. Next, our Research and Training Institute in Philadelphia, which is the only entity of its kind dedicated to cancer-related psychosocial, behavioral, and survivorship research. The RTI has contributed to the evidence base regarding the cancer patient experience through various publications and peer-reviewed studies using data collected by CSC's Cancer Experience Registry, which is a unique online community of over 13,000 cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers that provides people facing cancer with opportunities to share their experiences, identify common issues, participate in surveys, and more. The third area is our Cancer Policy Institute located in Washington, D.C. So at the CPI, we work to bring together patient advocates with policy experts to elevate the patient voice and ensure that the needs and experiences of cancer patients play a central role in federal and state legislative, regulatory, and executive policymaking. Patients are at the center of the work of the CPI. We utilize the leading-edge data from our Research and Training Institute to support our policy positions with evidence that is based in the patient experience. The CPI also engages in advocacy powered by the grassroots network of thousands of advocates across the country. Through our online platform, we provide updates on policy issues that could have an impact on the health and well-being of cancer patients and survivors, and offer opportunities for advocates to make their voices heard with federal and state policymakers. So you can find more information about any of our programs that I mentioned and more on our website. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our special guest, Adam, to talk to you today about effective advocacy on both sides of the desk, translating your experience into action. Adam?
Thank you so much, Shelby, and thank you all for joining and for having me. It's always an honor and privilege for me to be able to have these type of discussions, and really, excited for any questions that you may have at the end. But as Shelby had mentioned, my name is Adam Taliaferro, and I've been working at Bristol-Myers Squibb for about 5 years. In advocacy. And for me, advocacy is something that's a passion of mine. As I'll speak to in a little bit, my advocacy journey really began back in the year 2000. And Shelby, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So as I said, I truly believe, and I'm sure you all on the phone can speak to this just as well as I can, that we all have gotten engaged in this patient advocacy world because we're passionate about it, or we have personal stories or stories of loved ones that really cause us to want to get involved in this fight. And for me, I was, as you can see in the picture, I played football at Penn State, and my goal and my dream was to play professional football. I mean, from the age of 7, I loved the sport, and it was something that I was truly passionate about. But in the 5th game of my freshman year, we were playing against the Ohio State Buckeyes, I went in to make a tackle and unfortunately broke my neck and was paralyzed from the neck down. And for me, that was the first time I really faced any adversity in my life. But at the time, I realized in order to get through anything in life, you need people, you need others out there really advocating for your well-being. For me, I couldn't move anything from the neck down. And I remember, kind of waking up in the hospital the next day and, my parents being there and friends and family. But I quickly realized that there's a lot of people throughout this country that don't have families or friends, and they really need others to help advocate for them. So for me, my journey began in 2000. I was in the hospital for about 8 months, and thankfully through access to great medical care and great doctors, and through working with physical therapists every day, I regained the ability to walk after about 3 months, and in a total of 8 months going through rehab. I was able to get back to Penn State and kind of get back to somewhat of a normal life. And for me, I still consider myself a patient. I still go through physical therapy every day, and still have struggles. I haven't regained everything. The right side of my body's still a little bit weaker, but I get to come and do this work each and every day. The work that you all do, and it's inspiring to get to work with people that are going through these horrible diseases, but are fighting each and every day to get access to the care that they only need, that they don't only need, but the care that they deserve. So, Shelby, if you go to the next slide, that'd be great. So for me, I graduated from Penn State. I could no longer play football, but I decided I wanted to kind of go to law route. So I graduated from Penn State and then went to Rutgers Law School. And for me, I really wanted to try to get involved in some capacity with helping people. I never, to be perfectly honest with everybody, I never had any desire to get involved in public service or get involved in politics. But as we all say, life happens sometimes. And I started out at the local level, serving at the county level, then had the opportunity to join the state legislature in New Jersey back in 2012, or 2015. I apologize. And it's been a really unique experience, and it's been really eye-opening being able to, serve in this patient advocacy role, but also kind of be on the other side of the desk, as the title of this presentation is, and really get to see firsthand what it's like to work with people every day that are advocating for different things to me in my position in the General Assembly in New Jersey. And I really, that's what I really want to talk about today, is just some of the practices that I've seen in my role as a legislator that I thought have been really effective, and other things that I thought, maybe people could do a little bit better. And also, learn from folks on this call, things that you all do, because I really feel like the advocacy journey is a constant learning process. And the thing that I'll always tell people all the time is legislators, they are interesting. If you haven't already dealt with them in your capacity, you will find that these are very sometimes can be very difficult people to work with. And I say, you've always got to remember that legislators, they may tell you that they're experts in issues, but they are not experts. They are generalists in a bunch of different issues, and they really rely on the public and people like ourselves to really serve as the experts to keep them up to date on the latest issues. And as you can see on this page, I chair the Law and Public Safety Committee in the General Assembly. And I will be the first to tell you, I do not know much about law and public safety at all, and I rely on the advocates within those areas to really help me understand the issues and most importantly, the unintended consequences of some of the policies and different things that we're talking about in the General Assembly and also in the Senate each and every day in the state of New Jersey. So I tell you that because, a lot of the members in these state capitals are really making decisions that can impact our access to health care, but a lot of times they aren't experts in the issues that they're voting on, and they rely upon us and their staffers to really keep them up to speed. So the work that we do is vitally important in making sure that our message and the right information is getting across. Next slide, please. So this is nothing new to anybody on this call, but I always like putting the slide in here talking about the definition of advocacy, because as you can see on the slide, it says any act or process of supporting, publicly recommending, or pleading on the behalf of self or others. And the words that I always point to here is that the act or process. And, advocacy is something that doesn't, as we all know, something that doesn't happen overnight. And it could be, there could be many long days, and it could be, oftentimes frustrating when things don't happen immediately. But the thing that's always inspiring to me is that we know that this journey at some point is going to pay off. The constant meetings with legislators, the phone calls, the emails, the use of social media, those are all things that we'll talk about throughout this presentation, but that's all part of the journey to hopefully getting these legislators to understand the point of view, and most importantly, the patient point of view on these issues. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I always like talking about before getting into the advocacy discussion is just, the difference between advocacy and lobbying, because there's, depending upon the state that you reside in, there are lobbying laws that you have to be aware of if you do engage in lobbying activity, sometimes requiring you to become registered as a lobbyist and reporting, what you spend on your lobbying efforts and different things like that. So I just want to make sure that we do spend a little time distinguishing between what's lobbying and advocacy. And I always say all lobbying is advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. So as you can see here on the slide, advocacy is more of the general approach. There's no direct mention of a particular bill or legislation, but when you're talking about lobbying, you're getting more direct. You're asking that legislator to support us or challenge a specific piece of legislation. But advocacy, which I do in my daily role at BMS, is really just educating and enlightening legislators on issues and most importantly, the impact that those issues can have on patients each and every day. And I'm happy to answer, as we, at the end of this, if there's any questions on this topic, happy to answer any questions that come up. Next slide, please. And, when we talk about advocacy, I remember when, I had my injury and I was, as I said, I was in the hospital and recovering from my injury. And when I got out, I wanted to do whatever I could to advocate for people who, from my perspective, people who were going through spinal cord injuries. I wanted to make sure that everyone had all the resources and access to care that they needed, because when I was going through my rehab, I saw that a lot of people weren't getting the support that they needed. They were, due to insurance reasons, they were being kicked out of rehab before they were fully recovered from their injuries. They were being rushed through their physical therapy and things that just I felt weren't right. So I really wanted to try to get out there and advocate for the needs of patients. But I often ask myself, what the heck do I know about advocacy? And I also, when I talk about this, I like hearkening back to when we were all children, or for those who have kids, young kids, we're all advocates from a very young age. It's just, trying to pull out that inner advocate that we have. And for me, I always say, I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. And I said, my 3-year-old, he advocates every night that he wants ice cream instead of dinner. And he does that each and every night. So, that little 3-year-old, he's an advocate. And we all have those tendencies, and we've all been advocates in our own personal lives on various issues. And it's just really trying to find that comfort with whatever it is that you're advocating for. And as I'll speak about later on in the presentation, advocacy isn't just, going out speaking on issues. There's many different forms of advocacy, because as we all know, some of us may not be comfortable speaking in front of audiences. Some of us may not be great writers, but there's different ways that you can really get involved in the process, and each and every way is effective in its own right as we go forward on this advocacy journey. So as the slide says, I truly, from the bottom of my heart, believe that everyone can be an advocate on whatever it is, whatever issue that you choose to go speak about. I think we all have that power within us. So next slide, please. But as I just mentioned, there's so many different forms of advocacy when you talk about it. But as you see on the left, the first bullet point, I think the most important thing is just to be informed on your issue that you're speaking about. As I said, legislators are relying on us to be that source of information. When I'm thinking about issues on law and public safety, I get a lot of my information from watching the news at night or reading the newspaper. And as we all know, sometimes that may not be the most factual information. So it's always great to hear from people that are going through the specific issues, people that have firsthand experience to get that information. So you all are a valuable resource for the folks that, are making these policy decisions at the state level. As I said, meeting with staff and elected officials are when you think about traditional advocacy, that's certainly what we always think about. Testifying at public hearings, when you're going through the regulatory process, commenting on proposed rules. But another area that, again, something that is really starting to get more and more popular each and every year is the use of social media. And there's a slide later on in the presentation, but I'll speak a little bit about how you can use social media to engage with your local legislators. And also something that is very effective is writing letters to the editor or op-eds in your local newspaper, and also just general media training. getting with, your local news to really shine a light on different issues and create some awareness is another path that you can go. So I hope this slide just shows you that there's not just one forum, there's many different areas that if you feel so inclined that you can get engaged in the advocacy journey. So next slide, please. So I try, when I do this presentation, I try to keep it as simple as possible. When I think about just really 4 steps to advocacy, and the first one that I want to speak about briefly is forming partnerships. You've got the cancer support community, which is a wonderful organization that does so much great work across the country with all of you, the local affiliates, and the network that you've created is awesome. But as we always say, there's strength in numbers. So if there's opportunities to partner with other similarly situated organizations, other cancer organizations, that is always a great thing, because again, that numbers of people creates that heightened awareness amongst legislators. But something that really hit home for me when I joined the legislature was having the opportunity to partner with what I call a non-traditional partner. So if I have an issue that comes across my desk, in the back of my mind, I already kind of know the groups that I'm going to hear from and that I expect to hear from on an issue. But when I see a group that I wouldn't think would be part of that coalition, for instance, like if I see a Chamber of Commerce join in on a cancer-related issue, or a group from another therapeutic area. So, for instance, a cardiovascular group or immunoscience advocacy group joins in with a cancer group on an issue, that raises my antenna saying, wow, some of the groups that I didn't, why are these groups caring about this issue? And that's when I want to start meeting with people to gather more information about it, because it's that non-traditional partnership that really sometimes, makes that light bulb go off on the legislator saying, I really need to better understand this issue, because a lot of people from different diverse backgrounds care about this issue. So it must be important. So let me take meetings. Let me start gathering info on this issue. Number 2, which really goes without saying, is just the preparation side. I know everybody on this call already knows a lot about the issues that are going on in their states, but they're preparing for that interaction with your local elected official is always important, because as I've said numerous times throughout this presentation thus far, you are that source of information. And when a staffer from within the legislator's office, or the legislator himself or herself asks, and if that information is not exactly factual, then that could be an issue with the relationship, the advocacy relationship going down the road. But I think that preparation, and if you ever can get to the point where that legislator starts relying on you, calling you unsolicited, saying, hey, Shelby, I just got a quick question about a specific issue, then, that relationship is fantastic. And that's where we all hope to be, where we can become that trusted source of information for our policymakers in the state that we work in. And number 3, communication is key. I think, having that open and honest line of communication with your elected officials is great. But the most important thing is really developing that relationship early on, because it's always tough, if you got an issue going in your state and you go to that legislator for the very first time and say, hey, it would be great if you could support or not support an issue with not really having that foundational relationship. It's hard to go in for the very first time and make that ask and have him or her be with you on an issue. And then, following up. I always say, if I had $1 for every meeting that I had in my legislative office that there was never any follow-up, I'd be a rich guy, because unfortunately, people sometimes, with an advocacy issue, people get really fired up about an issue and they have that meeting with the legislator and then that's it, and nothing else happens from it. And, with legislators, they're dealing with a bunch of different issues. They have a bunch of different meetings throughout the day. And when you don't really have that follow-up, I'll tell you firsthand that issue doesn't go anywhere, because, unfortunately, the staff isn't, sometimes they'll follow up with you, but they rely on you to provide that follow-up information and, scheduling that next meeting and different things like that. So I think, number 4 out of all these steps is truly important, because, as I said, the advocacy is a process. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. Hey, sometimes there's that situation where you go in for that very first meeting and that legislator is with you on an issue, and that's fantastic. I wish that would happen all the time, but that's the rarity, and we got to keep this ball rolling. And I think, through our continued efforts, we can, make a lot of great progress as we go forward at the state level in 2019. So next slide, please. So this is just a little guide that we have, and we at BMS we have a grassroots advocacy toolkit, which is a completely unbranded toolkit, but just really gives you, just some of the one-on-ones and engaging with your elected officials in your states. And as I always like to show with this slide and the gold writing, it says, always have a clear goal in mind and stick to the plan. And I'm going to try to give some of the firsthand experiences that I've seen, in Trenton when folks come to meet with me is oftentimes, people are really excited, and even myself in my role at BMS, when I'm going there to meet with legislators in other states and talk about issues, your adrenaline gets up and you get really excited to meet with these folks, but it's easy to kind of veer and get off subject when you're meeting with different individuals. So I always say, before you go into that meeting, make sure you have what you want to get across to that legislator, whether it's one or two specific facts or issues. Make sure you put that at the top of your list, and don't forget to get that across, because there's been plenty of times where I've had meetings and I say, you know what, it was nice to meet that group, but I don't really know what they were asking for or what issue they were trying to address. So I always say, if you can make sure you stick to your plan and have that clear goal in mind, that really helps kind of set the tone for the meeting. And then the second box is trusting your story. There are so many great inspiring patient stories out there that need to be told. I say legislators are you can give them facts and figures, and to be honest, sometimes they go in one ear and out the other. But it's those patient stories that legislators never forget. When you talk about a story or you talk about an issue and how it has personally impacted you or impacted somebody that you know about, those are the stories that legislators will often repeat to their colleagues in the legislature. So, if I hear a story about an issue and how it impacts somebody, when I'm having lunch in the cafeteria with other legislators, I'll say, hey, Senator X, I just heard this unbelievable story. Did you hear about, this issue and how it's affected this population of people? And I will not remember a number, but I will absolutely remember a story that really, has that personal touch. So I can't tell you how important it is to trust the story that you're telling and tell that story from your own personal perspective. Secondly is doing your research about that legislator before you go into that office. It's always good to know, or at least have a somewhat of an understanding if that legislator is with you or against you on a specific issue. And you may not know, and it may take that first meeting to get a better understanding of where that legislator sits on a position. But I always say, if you can get a piece of information on that legislator that really helps break the ice, then go for it. For me, as you saw, I went to Penn State. So if I see a legislator and I look at their bio and I see that they went to Penn State, of course I'm leading off with, hey, I saw you went to Penn State, and talking about that just to really kind of break down that barrier. And there's often, as I showed you on the earlier slide, most legislators have their bios on the state website, and it often says where they went to school or different hobbies or their occupation and different places that they work. So it's always helpful to find if you do have that connection, trying to build upon any connection that you may have to legislators within your within the folks that you're meeting with. And I always say, if you're a constituent, if you live within that legislator's district, always lead off with that, because legislators, of course, like to get reelected, and they are always willing and want to hear from the folks that they know can get them elected, or unfortunately not get them reelected, and that's a very powerful position to be in as a constituent going to meet with your legislator. As I spoke about earlier, using accurate facts when you're talking about issues in the meetings, and I think the most powerful thing that you can say when you're in meetings with legislators and you don't know the answer to a question is, hey, I don't have that information, but I'll get back to you. And that goes back to what I spoke about earlier about the follow-up, because, sometimes when the conversation gets flowing and the legislator, asks you a question, well, how many people in the state of New Jersey are, dealing with lung cancer. Sometimes you may not have that answer, in the back of your mind, but you can say, hey, you know what, I don't have that, but I'll get back to you. But, the worst thing you could do is guesstimate a number or, just throw out a number that's not always accurate, because oftentimes, like myself, I have a chief of staff who's always with me in my meetings, and most legislators have staff that sit in with meetings that take notes, and a lot of times their jobs are to fact check the information that's being talked about in the meeting, and those would be the first ones to say, hey, you know what, I don't think the information that was provided in that meeting was exactly factual. And again, that goes back to that legislator not trusting, not creating that trusting relationship that we all want to have with our policymakers in the state that we work in. One of the things, and I keep saying, there's different things that are very important, but one of the things that I struggled with when I first started on my advocacy journey was asking for something out of the meeting. I'm the type of person, some of us are like this, we just hate asking people for stuff. And it took me a while to realize that, legislators and all public servants, they're in office because they want to help. They ran, and it may sound cliche, but I hope all of the legislators that are in office are in there for the right reasons, because they want to help make people's lives better. And the only way they can do that is by, being asked to do different things. So from my perspective, never leave an advocacy meeting without asking for something. And it doesn't have to be, anything, earth-shattering. I would say, and ask just as simple as asking for a follow-up meeting is just as important as, anything else that you may ask for throughout that meeting. But asking for, asking them to support an issue, asking them how they feel about an issue, but ask for something. Don't just go in and there's been many meetings when I say, to people, is there anything that I can do to help you? And people say, well, no, I'm all good. Just wanted to say hello to you, which is nice. It's always good to meet new people and constituents and different things like that. But I will tell you, when you have that follow-up meeting, or when they reach out for that follow-up meeting, it may take them a little while to get that rescheduled, because I say, hey, I just met with them and they didn't really need anything. So, I could put that meeting off for a little while longer, because I'm sure if they needed something, they would have asked me during that meeting. So I always throw that out there that, make sure, even if it's just asking for that follow-up meeting, taking advantage of that time you have with your legislator. And something else is, it sounds super simple, but sometimes it falls through the cracks, is having that business card and information. So just 2 days ago, we were in session in New Jersey, and whenever we're, prior to my committees, I try to fit in as many meetings with, advocacy groups or constituents that I can prior to the meeting. So I had, 4 meetings prior to my committee meeting, and we do these meetings back to back to back. And oftentimes, I'm running into the meeting and my chief of staff is there, and the group will come in and they'll just start getting into an issue and not introduce themselves. And I swear to you, on Monday, we were like halfway through the meeting, and I had no idea who we were meeting with. And it was kind of embarrassing. I didn't want to stop them in the middle, but after the meeting was over, they didn't have any, they didn't give us a business card or anything. And I mean, I knew what issue they were on, but I cannot tell you which group they were, because they never introduced themselves and never gave me a card. And, although it was a great meeting, I had no idea how to even follow up with them, because we never did the introductions. So just, simple thing, just always remember, like, these legislators are meeting with a bunch of people throughout the day. So, always make sure that you have that information. And another thing that's always extremely helpful is having that one pager, that piece of information that you can have as a leave behind to really bring home the point of the meeting. Because I can tell you, there's oftentimes I'll do meetings throughout the day, and I'll either be at home or back in my office later on in the afternoon, and I'll take that one pager out and kind of just recap some of the meetings. And it's always helpful to have that as a resource to really help remind me of some of the key points that were spoken about in that meeting that I had with an advocacy group. And always, the last point here is just try to have fun with it and remind yourself why you're doing it. As I said, this process can be long, it can be tedious. You can sometimes deal with legislators that aren't the friendliest people in the world. But, think about, why you got involved in this, why you're passionate about the work that you're doing, because it's, I said, you all could be doing many different things with your talents, but you decided to be involved in this advocacy world and really fight for people who need us to be fighting on their behalf. And I'll often say giving a voice to the people that sometimes are voiceless and don't have the opportunity to share their stories. So, on behalf of all the folks that you advocate for, thank you for that work, because it's work that's truly needed. And never forget that you're truly making a difference in the lives of so many people across this country. Next slide, please. So again, this is just an add-on to the previous slide that I just spoke about. But just one of the things that I just want to reiterate is, providing those examples why this issue is important to the people that you represent. There's so many times when I walk to the Capitol and people say, vote yes on this or vote no on that. But the ones that are truly helpful to me is when they pull me aside and say, hey, vote yes on this because X, Y, or Z, or vote no on this because this is how it impacts the folks that I represent. And that really is meaningful to me, as opposed to someone just saying, vote yes, vote no. So just always remember to tell that legislator why that specific issue can impact the work that the people that you're representing each and every day. And then, again, developing those relationships. I always say the best time to go in and meet with the legislators when you don't have a pressing issue at hand. Going to familiarize that legislator with your organization and the great work that you're doing, most likely in his or her own backyard in the district that they represent. So when that pressing issue or when that vote comes up, you have that relationship already built in, and it makes that ask much easier to go forward with when you've already got that relationship. One of the biggest things that was a learning for me, going through this journey, was that I always thought, if I'm going into an advocacy meeting, I want to meet with that legislator. I want to meet with that senator, that representative. And you know what? There's going to be times when that senator or that representative is unable to meet, and he or she sends their staff to meet with you. And a lot of times I thought, you know what? If I'm not meeting with the legislator, this is a waste of my time. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The legislator's chief of staff and the staff that him or her has around them, those are sometimes the most important meetings that you can ever have on issues. Again, for instance, myself, I have a chief of staff who his full-time job is to be in Trenton, meeting with groups, learning about issues, reading about everything that's going on in the state. And I have a full-time job. I work here at Bristol-Myers and I travel a lot, and I can't always be in the know on every issue, but that's his job to do that. So he's meeting with people right now as we speak, and I rely on him to help me come up with solutions for different issues, or to be perfectly honest, he helps me better understand how I should vote on different issues because of his expertise and his well-rounded knowledge of issues. So I tell you that short story to let you know the importance of staffers and the influence that they have on the legislators and the way that they look at issues and most importantly how they vote on issues when it comes time to really state their opinion on issues. And again, staying on point and staying on message is something that is always important. I don't want to, as a legislator, I sometimes I feel like I talk badly about them, but it's funny because I see it firsthand. Is like these men and women sometimes don't have because they're so busy, they're dealing with so many different issues, the attention span can sometimes be a little, I guess I should say short. So if the meeting or if you're talking longer than 15, 20 minutes, their mind starts to wander. You may see them checking their phones and checking emails and text messages and different things like that. So as succinct and short and to the point you can keep your messages, I always say the better. And as I said, those one-pagers are always fantastic resources to have as leave-behind materials. So next slide, please. So again, just to round out the conversation, I always like to put just a couple quick bullet points on the do's and don'ts of advocacy. And again, these are things that we've already spoke about. About introducing yourself, telling that personal story, personalizing the issue, and I always say keeping it nonpartisan. From my perspective, I always, I come in with the mindset that whether it's a Republican or Democrat, as long as they care about my issues, as long as they're willing to listen, we can provide them with information that can really help them better understand why this issue is important to us. So it doesn't matter about their political affiliation, but the fact that they're meeting with me, the fact that they want to learn more about the issue is a positive in my mindset. And as I said earlier, always ask for something. Even if you don't have anything specific to ask for, asking for that follow-up meeting is always something that you can have as a takeaway from that meeting. As I said earlier, don't cover too many issues. If you keep it to 1 or 2, 3 at the most, going into a meeting, that's always super helpful. Arguing, there are going to be times when legislators that you meet with aren't with you on issues, and that's okay, But I always say, don't argue. You can call them bad names after the meeting, but try not to argue during that meeting. And I think if there's a legislator that's not with you, you got to look at it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to really help them understand, why these issues are important. And as I said earlier, it's not going to happen overnight. But that initial meeting is the first step, hopefully, into getting them to understand why issues and why they potentially should change their mind on an issue. And never forget to follow up. Those follow-ups are the way to keep that legislator engaged on an issue because, again, if we don't have that follow-up, that legislator is just going to go to that next meeting and most likely forget about, within a day, what you all have spoken about. But if you can follow up, whether it's via email, thanking that legislator, saying, hey, thank you for that, thank you for the meeting. Here's, a summary of what we spoke about, and if there's an opportunity, I would love to schedule a follow-up meeting, different things like that, and then we'll talk about in a little bit, following up even via social media, thanking that legislator, on Twitter or Facebook or different ways that you could follow up from your initial meeting. So next slide. So just this is just a little fun way to some of the things of not to say when you're advocating or meeting with your elected officials. And sometimes when you meet with staff, and these are all from firsthand, talking to other legislators and colleagues that I work with and have met with across the country. I thought I'll just meet with the center. I don't want to meet with just staff. And as I said earlier, the staff for legislators are some of the most important people that you can deal with each and every day. And another one is here's our 300-page report. There's so many times, when I go into meetings and someone comes in with like a single-spaced, 200-page report on a specific issue, and I will tell you that report is not typically going to get read by myself. My staff may look through it and try to summarize it, but instead of providing a 300-page report, if you could provide a summary of that report or a one-pager that summarizes that report, that's always a great way to go. And, it's easy, when you're dealing with in state legislation, and you can, there's bill numbers. So, for instance, I assume you know all about HR, 1234. And, people will say that, and I'll shake my head, but I'll have no clue. There's so many different bills that are going through the state legislatures. It's nice to refer to a bill, but always make sure you summarize what that issue is. Never assume that legislator knows, what that issue is at the time. And, sometimes there's, meetings can get a little bit heated, and, you say, so if you don't support us, we'll assure that you don't get reelected. And again, you can say all that stuff after the meeting, but if you say that during the meeting, then, that legislator will say, hey, he'll talk to his or her colleagues and say, hey, I met with this group and they were very volatile, and, that word gets around to other legislators, and then it could become an issue where it's tough to get a meeting with others because that reputation has been built as, a meeting that's not, very friendly. And as I said, doing your best to keep it nonpartisan is always a good way to go about things when you're dealing with legislators on both sides of the aisle. And to be honest, in most states, you've got to have that having that bipartisan support is always very helpful in getting your issues across the finish line. So next slide, please. So one of the new areas that we're all starting to work in is, using social media in our advocacy. And, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, most legislators in today's times have some sort of social media that they use to communicate with their audiences. And it was a funny thing that happened to me. I I'm a big user of Twitter. I've got a Facebook page, but I rarely check it. And there was a group saying, Adam, we've been sending you messages on Facebook, and you haven't gotten back to us. And I told them, if you look at my Facebook page, you can see that I haven't posted on that page in like 3 months. But if you look at my Twitter, like every day or every other day, I'm posting different things on Twitter. So I would say research the form of social media your target users most, and use that form to communicate with them. So if you find that your policymaker uses Facebook all the time, then send a message via Facebook. If it's Twitter, then use that form to get in contact with him or her. But another good way, as I said, to create that follow-up meeting is that sometimes when you're meeting with legislators, it's nice to take a picture and say, hey, legislator, Senator X, thank you so much for that meeting. But I always say, it's nice to give that legislator notice before you post that picture. So after the meeting, say, hey, can we take a picture? I would love to post this on Twitter to our constituents. And it's usually, I would say 90% of the time it's not an issue. But it was funny because there's another legislator that I work with, and he had declined a meeting with one advocacy group to take a meeting with another advocacy group, but he didn't tell the other group that he was meeting with another group, and the group sent the picture out, and it became a big issue because he declined the meeting with one, and he didn't know the group was sending out a picture, so it just made it awkward for everybody. It was unintended, but he didn't know the group was sending out the thank you email, and the other group saw and was not happy that he declined their meeting to meet with the other group. So if you give that notice, that's always helpful. And then I always say using hashtags. So for those who don't use social media that much, hashtags are a way that you can, search different issues. So whether it's, hashtag using the specific bill number as a hashtag, or the issue name as the hashtag, or even the group. So, using Cancer Support Community as a hashtag, it's always a great way to, for instance, like my staff will search issues by hashtag and see how many people are talking about it. So, the more you can create a sense of urgency around the issue, the hashtags can be very helpful in creating that buzz around the issue. And then finally, as I keep saying, is just keeping the messages short and to the point is always a great way to go about it. So next slide. So, to wrap up, when we talk about effective advocacy, there's no specific, magic bullet to what perfect advocacy looks like. Everybody, as I mentioned earlier, goes about advocacy in their own way. Different, all of us are good at different things. Some of us are stronger in different areas of advocacy than others. But the most important thing is just building that trust, building that foundation for educating and convincing these policymakers as to why your issue is important. That's where it all begins, that engagement process and building that foundation of trust. And then, again, this is not a one-time activity. This is about building relationships over time and building not only with the legislature but with their staff, because I can assure you that will pay off in the long run. And for me, I'm just thankful to have had the time with you all, because I know all of us are in different stages of our advocacy journey, but we're all pushing in the same direction. And for you all to be interested in this is really neat for me. And I'll throw it out there. Part of my role at BMS, I do a lot of advocacy trainings and travel. Really, I cover the entire East Coast of the Mississippi East, and I have a colleague who's based in Chicago who covers from the Mississippi West. And a big part of our jobs are really working with local groups on advocacy and doing these type of trainings. So, if there's ever an opportunity, I'm always more than happy to come out and do something in person and, get to know you all. And, just so thankful for the partnership that we have with you, Shelby and Elizabeth, between both of our organizations. So I think this is going to be, the first step, and hopefully a lot of different opportunities for us to connect. And I'm just thankful for the time. So I do have just one more slide, so Shelby can go to one more, that'd be great. So as I always am, I just want you all to know, and this is not anything that you don't already know, but the fact that you can make a change. And this picture that's up here is, that's me in the middle, and to the left is the Senate President, who we both represent the same district, but he's the President of the Senate, and then on the right is a high-ranking member of the Senate. And the women around us, they were advocates. These were a group of advocates that I met my first week in office, and they were advocating for a budget appropriation for healthy school breakfast. And it's not an issue that I knew much about, but they came in and provided that one pager, and really, from day one, they created a relationship with them that really was second to none. I could tell you, I couldn't walk in the State House without seeing them. Every week I have an email with different pieces of information on healthy school breakfast. On Twitter, they'd be sending me messages. These people were nonstop. And I tell you, we all are busy. We don't have time. It's tough to be engaged every day. But as I spoke about earlier, with the coalition, and people taking different tasks, if you work within a team, you can really get your point across. And I show this picture because these women didn't give up after the first meeting. I remember, we had our first meeting. I said, thank you for the information, and really, wasn't my issue. So I really wasn't at the top of my radar. But they asked for a follow-up meeting, and after each and every meeting, they were providing me with new information that really it started to hit home for me. It really helped me to understand why the issue was important. And they did this not only with me, but with all the legislators throughout the state of New Jersey. And at the end of budget session, their appropriation was signed by the governor, and without them, that wouldn't have happened. And it's just it's inspiring to see how it started and where it ended, and that's and the work that we all do with the issues that we're all facing across the country. It's great to have all that we have before us, but it's a tough road ahead. But with the people that you all are surrounded with each and every day, the partnership that we have, I truly believe that we can accomplish and a lot of the issues that we're working on, and really be that voice for the patient that we all hope to be. So I'll stop there, but most importantly, I want to thank you all for your time today. I know you all are super busy. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity, and it's been an absolute pleasure to join you today. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Adam. That was so great. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us and walk us through advocacy and talk about how advocacy is a journey, and it's so important that we continue to work at it and build relationships and really trust the story that we're telling, as you said. So I think we can go on. We have some time for some questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it in that Q&A box down on the right-hand corner. Our first question comes from Kathy. It's in regards to that advocacy versus lobbying slide. She asks, when we have Hill Days through various nonprofit organizations, is that lobbying, since we are asking for support on specific bills?
Yeah, so that is a fantastic question. And a lot of times you'll be with a lobby, so it could vary, to be perfectly honest with you. But for instance, when you're doing Hill Days and lobby days, a lot of times you'll be with one of your registered lobbyists. Like, for instance, at BMS here, we have registered lobbyists. So I can go with them and be under what they call their covenant. So I'll be with our registered lobbyists, and I will go in under their covenant. So I will be doing lobbying activities because I'll be asking for specific support of a specific piece of legislation. But our registered I'll be with our registered lobbyist, so he will, report that activity under his covenant, but it will cover me. So although I won't be registered as a lobbyist, I can still engage in lobbying activity because I'll be covered under that covenant. So it was I apologize, it was a long-winded way of saying that there are ways to, I would say, not get around lobbying, but if you're with a registered lobbyist, within your organization, then you'll be safe. But it's always good, as I always say, to check with your, the local rules and check with your staff and your registered lobbyists, because those will be the ones that can really keep you clear under the crazy laws that we have state by state and certainly at the federal level.
Great. Thanks, Adam. And could you clarify for us really quickly, because I think a lot of our affiliates on the line, are not lobbyists or registered lobbyists, and I think we'd love a little more information if you can kind of clarify the difference between more educating versus lobbying.
Yeah, absolutely. So It's interesting you say that, Shelby, because again, here at BMS, we still go through that struggle as well. We have outside counsel that we work with that still help educate us on the differences between advocacy and lobbying, because it is, to be perfectly honest with you, it's a very fine line between the two. But I would say from an advocacy perspective, it's truly just that education on different issues. So, for instance, if there's a specific bill that's going on in a state, we can use step therapy. If there's a step therapy, for example. So if you've got a step therapy bill in a specific state, you can go into that meeting from an advocacy perspective and say, hey, just wanted to come educate you on, Senate Bill 123, and tell you about the impact, the negative impacts that it will have on the patient community. And you can go through and tell those personal stories and talk about why it's not in the best interest of patients to have step therapy in that state, and why a provider should have the ability to override those step therapy protocols, and really do that entire meeting, strictly on an advocacy basis, because at the end of the day, you are educating him or her, that legislator, on the negative or positive impacts of a specific issue. And you could do that without really ever referencing, a specific bill number, or even saying, I need you to vote no on that specific bill. Through your patient stories and telling him or her about the negative impacts, they know where you stand, and that's will really win the day. But again, I think, from our standpoint, even at BMS, before we go into any state, we take the time, to work with, of course, certainly from my perspective, always happy to help if there is a state that you have a question on. As I said, we have the resources at BMS where we have a person that's specifically responsible for looking at the legislation in that state to figure out what the lobbying laws are, because there are some states where there are no real lobbying requirements, but there's other states, literally, if you step foot in the state capitol, you've got to register as a lobbyist. So I keep saying, from my perspective, it's really important to know the laws in your state, and I am more than happy if there's any questions following this. If you send me an email or have a question about specific states that you're in, happy to provide that answer and get you a response to that.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, please, if anybody has any questions about that or otherwise, you're welcome to email me, and I can send those along to Adam. So we have another question here. Diane wants to know, she says, I want to become an advocate for people diagnosed with sarcomas. Would I need to get in contact with my local sarcoma group? I think I'll take that one really quickly and say that the Cancer Support Committee has a lot of resources in terms of advocating for people with specific cancer types. And we also work very heavily as a community, all patient advocacy organizations, and so we work with sarcoma-specific groups. But if that's something that you would like to get involved in your local area with sarcoma-specific work, we're happy to connect you with those types of groups. So you're welcome to reach out to the Cancer Support Community, and we can put you in contact. And I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, Adam.
No, Shelby, I think you hit the nail on the head. As I said earlier, I think that's a great thing about the Cancer Support Committee. It's just the network of groups that you work with is truly fantastic, and there's always other folks that you can reach out to help them get connected. So, again, thank you all to the work that you do.
Great. Thanks, Adam. And so we have just a few more minutes left, so I want to end it with just one last question to kind of wrap up the presentation. So what is one thing after today that someone without any policy or advocacy experience can do to get involved?
I think the most important thing, if you want to get involved in an issue, is really reaching out and connecting with folks that are, in your state. So, again, I think, to the individual who, wanted to reach out to talk about, advocating for individuals with sarcoma, I think starting with, you could literally, again, reach out to your local cancer support community, your Gilda's Club affiliates, and tell them, hey, I want to get involved in the issue, and they will be able to connect you with basically, anyone that's working on that issue, specifically in the area of, cancer. And, from my perspective, we've got a team at Bristol Myers. We've got 10 folks that are based all across the country, from a state government affairs perspective that can are always happy, and myself as well, to give you a download on everything from a health policy perspective that's going on in your state. So we, one of the things that we do, we can come in and say, hey, from here in the state of Maryland, here are all the issues that could potentially impact patient access to care. But whatever state it is, we can always provide that type of information, and then you can, make a decision that, how you want to potentially engage on that issue. So I think it's to answer your question, it's really gathering the information first, because a lot of times when you want to get engaged on an issue, there's usually, most likely, there's always people that are also interested or already working on that issue. So instead of trying to start from square one, joining up with people that are already invested in that issue can be a great way to get involved without having to do too much of the early legwork. So always happy to provide those connections. Like I said, we're working in states, every state across this country, and happy to partner with you in any way, and always think of us as a resource as we go forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, and we're just about out of time, so I think we'll wrap it up here. But again, thank you for your time and for taking this time to really walk us through advocacy from both perspectives, as an advocate but also as a legislator, and what's most important for advocates to be bringing to the table when they're meeting with legislators. So going forward.
Thank you, Shells.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out. My email's on the screen, and I'm happy to put you in contact with Adam. And have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks.